This is Political Science Judiciary. What if arguments before the Supreme Court were televised? Since 1955, the United States Supreme Court has created audio recordings of oral arguments before the court. For cases that generate high public interest, the court agrees to same-day oral argument audio release. During every session of the Supreme Court, a court reporter transcribes every word that is spoken, even with indications when there's laughter. You can find a written transcript of each oral argument at www.supremecourtus.gov. And at the end of every term, you can also obtain all of the audio recordings online at www.oyez.org. Today, many states have gone one step further. They allow appellate court sessions to be televised. The federal appellate courts and the Supreme Court, though, have resisted televising their proceedings. The Supreme Court Justice David Souter, who recently retired, was on record as saying that the day you see a camera come into our courtroom, it's going to roll over my dead body. A few years ago, several senators, both Republicans and Democrats, reintroduced a bill to require the court to televise its proceedings. As Senator Arlen Specter, Democrat from Pennsylvania, said, televising the proceedings of the Supreme Court will allow some light to shine on proceedings and give the public greater awareness of what the court is doing. Now, what if the arguments before the Supreme Court were televised? Presumably, coverage of the Supreme Court proceedings would be undertaken in the same way as sessions of the House and the Senate are televised by C-SPAN. The C-SPAN coverage includes no commentaries whatsoever about the proceedings in the chambers of Congress. So the television coverage is pretty straightforward. It's pretty word for word, and therefore it's pretty darn boring. In the Supreme Court, similar television coverage would consist of one or two cameras and their operators discreetly positioned in the courtroom where the 9 justices hear oral arguments and question the attorneys. Just as with the C-SPAN coverage of Congress, though, few individuals would actually watch all of the proceedings each day that the court is in session from the first Monday in October until the end of June, first week of July. The Supreme Court could follow the states, which have already developed a wide variety of rules governing television coverage of court proceedings. Most states' rules allow the presiding judge, in the case of the Supreme Court, that would be the Chief Justice of the court, to limit or preclude coverage when it might bias the jury or affect the proceedings. Most states also allow the parties to object to television coverage and to require some sort of consent from the parties involved. Well, let's enter the internet here. The 2 channels of C-SPAN offer a lot more coverage than just the sessions of Congress. A 3rd C-SPAN channel might have to be created in order to televise the Supreme Court proceedings. So as an alternative, we could envision internet video streaming as a low-cost alternative to creating another television channel. Indeed, one could imagine that internet video streaming of the Supreme Court would be available all over the world and would better give people, or at least those that are not Americans, a better understanding of what American jurisprudence is all about. Would there be grandstanding? Is that a possibility? Certain sitting judges and others have argued against televising Supreme Court sessions because of the possibility of grandstanding. In other words, they are worried that the justices might ask questions and make comments during the proceedings in the hopes that those comments would become sound bites on the evening news. Yay, Dan Rather. Justice Antonin Kennedy, speaking before the Senate Judiciary Committee last year, said that televising the proceedings would change our collegial dynamic. But not everyone agrees. Judge O'Scanlan of the Federal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals believes just the opposite. He said that concerns about television coverage leading to grandstanding and politicking in the courtroom is greatly overstated. Indeed, he argues that televising appellate court proceedings depoliticizes them, improves the public's perception of the appellate legal process, and draws away the black curtain that covers the federal judiciary. Is it slicing and dicing? Specialized channels on cable television would certainly make use of the televised proceedings of the Supreme Court. These specialized channels would offer highlights from the most important cases heard. Interestingly, there would also be websites devoted to dissecting the way that Supreme Court cases are decided. Imagine sitting in the courtroom listening to the arguments or watching the arguments of Brown versus Board of Education, Roe versus Wade, or Bush v. Gore. If Supreme Court proceedings were televised, we could expect a media industry to follow, particularly on the internet. There might be new websites with portions of Supreme Court proceedings shown in the video, along with commentary by legal experts and political experts. And what does this really mean for us, Joe Blow? For you to think about on this, about televising Supreme Court arguments, how wide an audience do you believe the television proceedings of the Supreme Court would have? Would they be the next new American Idol stars? Do you think that televised proceedings of the Supreme Court would significantly increase the public's awareness of Supreme Court decisions? Tell me why or why not, and be able to defend your opinion.